Greetings from the cosmic horrors. The stars are right once again. The great old ones are allowing us to talk about for 30 plus minutes H.P. Lovecraft, the horror writer who's a genre unto himself. I'm your cosmic host, Mark Griffin, executive of the Lovecraft Estate on Yagath, joined in by two from the material world, David Guffey, a professor at Mispatong University, and Richard Wilson, who's waiting for his best of video.
Gonna be a short reel.
We have three returning guests, Eric Roper and Darren Evans from Slipstream Entertainment, and Jeff Thompson of Tennessee State University. They're back again to talk about Dark Shadows, that best known as a Gothic soap opera, but it also had a few movies of it as well. And before we talk about the movies, I was wanting to ask you about the since Dark Shadows, the TV show, is available on DVD and streaming and through Tubi, do you recommend for the curious to start watching from episode 1 of Dark Shadows, which is sometimes called the beginning, or jump ahead to when Barnabas first appears?
Well, there are two or several schools of thought about that. A logical place to start is the beginning, but you're not really getting the full effect of Dark Shadows because Dark Shadows had not become Dark Shadows yet until about 10 or 12 months into the run of the show. When Dark Shadows began, it was just a couple of steps beyond The Edge of Night or Peyton Place in terms of being a soap opera about a family and their problems and business, but with a little bit of Gothic mystery and intrigue, hearing sounds of sobbing in the house and unexplained phenomena, but nothing compared to what it was going to be like after the introduction of Barnabas Collins 10 months into the run of the show. But if you start with the Barnabas episodes, you really are at sea in terms of knowing who the family members are and their relationships to each other and what has happened. And in some of those early Barnabas episodes, Barnabas and that storyline are not in it. So you're still seeing, what had been going on in the soap opera in other storylines. Something that I've thought would be interesting if a station were to start showing Dark Shadows and wanted to really jump into the show with Barnabas and Angelique and time travel and color, you could start with a certain 1795 episode. In late 1967 and early 68, the show was set in 1795 and revealing how Barnabas Collins became a vampire, cursed by the vengeful witch Angelique. And there is one episode near the beginning of 1795 that spotlights Angelique, and she meets Ben Stokes in the woods. Ben Stokes is an indentured servant to the Collins family and will become Barnabas Collins's manservant. And she casts a spell on him and bewitches him and takes away his will and makes him her slave. And he must, betray Barnabas and unwillingly assist her in her plans against Barnabas and the Collins family. So if you really wanted to jump into the story, that would be a good place to start because 1795 had not been going on for very long, maybe a week and a half or 2 weeks. And this was a place that was intriguing and exciting and could hook viewers who really didn't know anything about the show.
What about you, Eric and Darren?
Well, I started with Barnabas, so I think that's a good spot to start. Honestly, I've not seen the first part before Barnabas. That's something that me and him are going to do at later point. But Barnabas is a good start when he comes in.
I do feel if you start with the Barnabas, you do miss, which I thought was one of the more interesting storylines they did in the beginnings, which was the Phoenix storyline. And there's still that unanswered question for me: is David Collins half Phoenix? And
Very possibly.
He's a brat.
Yeah.
and they never did anything else with that storyline. You think he was a half Phoenix, that they would like he'd be like demonstrating fire powers or something, but he never did anything else with it.
I wonder if they did anything with that in the comics.
No.
No.
No. Okay.
No. David Collins was never a character in the Gold Key comics. But later in the show in 1969, when the show was taking place in the year 1897, Diana Malay, who played the Phoenix fire creature, came back into the story as another earlier incarnation of Laura Collins, the Phoenix. And so there was another story about her coming back to take her children. And Diana Malay mentioned at a Dark Shadows festival once that in late 1970 or before before everyone knew that the show had been canceled, Dan Curtis had talked to Diana Malay and told her that he would like her to come back again as Laura the Phoenix. So if the show had lasted beyond early April of 1971, Diana Malay may have come back as Laura yet again, and then perhaps there would have been some more answers about her and her son David in the present time.
Mm-hmm.
I would have loved that one. It's like one of the few things I would have liked to have seen resolved or like expanded upon, I guess you could say.
And the actor John Lascelles, who played Dr. Guthrie, who was determined to expose Laura as a supernatural creature, has been alive all this time. He was 95, but died just a few weeks ago.
Yeah, I just saw that in the news.
Yeah, he also he was in an episode of Night Gallery, but watch for the Twilight Zone episode in which the man goes back in time to just before the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, and John Lascelles, Dr. Guthrie, plays John Wilkes Booth. The name of that episode is Back There.
Did you get to meet him?
No, he never came to a Dark Shadows festival. A few fans managed to find his address and wrote to him and sent him some pictures to sign. But no, he is one of the actors who never participated in the festivals.
And we'll jump into since Dark Shadow ran for over 1,000 episodes, it'd be overwhelming for some people to watch. They did release in 2012 and 2015 DVD versions called Dark Shadow: The Greatest Episode Collections, The Best of Barnabas, or The Best of Quentin, or Fan Favorites. Would you recommend people trying to watch them?
Yes, those were really good DVDs. They have new introductions by Catherine Lee Scott, who played Maggie and Josette, or Laura Parker, who played Angelique and who passed away about a year ago. And so if you watch the episodes with the little DVD introduction, Catherine or Laura tells you sort of what is happening. This episode takes place in the present time or in the year 1897, and Angelique or Barnabas has just done so and so. And so, yeah, those DVDs do give a nice sampling of episodes that were interesting, exciting, shocking, significant in different time periods of the show, including 1795 and when the show went into parallel time, an alternate universe, and even the show went forward into the future for 2 weeks to the then future year of 1995. That was 25 years in the future when they went into that year. But of course, now that's in our past. So yes, I liked those episodes. I rewatched some of them recently. Fan favorites, The Best of Barnabas, The Best of Angelique, and The Best of Quentin. And then also MPI Home Video, which releases all of the Dark Shadows episodes, did essentially a new work, a compilation of scenes from the 1795 storyline called The Vampire Curse, and one from the late 1968 Turn of the Screw type story The Haunting of Collinwood. Each one of them runs about 3 hours and 7 minutes, but you get a really good idea, a great overview of the whole 1795 story, minus the witch trial. The compilation focuses on the Barnabas Angelique story and how Angelique curses Barnabas and he becomes a vampire. But those were quite interesting, and essentially they are new products. They are new movies, culled from scenes from the show that ran over a period of 3, 4, 5 months.
So just making an understanding, basically took old episodes and just kind of re-edited it almost like it's like a movie version.
Yes, right, exactly. So obviously, the vast majority of that string of episodes is removed, but you get the highlights, and it is a very coherent reshaping of the Vampire Curse storyline, and so you see all of the important scenes when Angelique curses Barnabas and when he comes back as a vampire, and it goes from essentially the beginning of 1795 until the end, and even ends with a clip from those first Barnabas episodes in 1967, when Willie Loomis, John Carlin, opens the chained coffin and the hand comes out and grabs him by the throat. That was not Jonathan Fryde's hand. It was the hand of Timothy Gordon, who was a stunt character that the show used for various ghosts and disembodied hands and things like that.
That's a job there to have.
Yeah.
Did you play the werewolf that would pop up from time?
No, that was stuntman Alex Stevens, who was Frank Sinatra's stuntman in some movies, Lady in Cement, and some movies like that. And I think he did some work on the first Superman movie with Christopher Reeve, and quite a few high-profile Hollywood films during and especially after the time of Dark Shadows. But yeah, the werewolf was always Alex Stevens, who was noticeably shorter than David Selby and Don Briscoe, who played the other werewolf. But, if someone can change his shape into that of a wolf, he probably would lose a lot of height.
But I guess they just had to use anybody they could for a quick, changeover. So would you like to see more Dark Shadows done that way?
What, those compilation?
The compilations?
Yes. The 1897 storyline lasts about 9 months, so there might have to be a part 1 and part 2 to get all of that. But I'd like to see a good one spotlighting 1970 parallel time, and maybe 1840 near the end of the show, when we learn more about the origin of Angelique herself. And there is another witch trial in Collinwood. So, yeah, there are several other points in the story that could be condensed into another feature movie like that.
What about you, Eric and Darren? Would you like to see compilations done like that for Dark Shadows, or do you feel they feel like it's cheating?
I'm more of an originalist, so I probably would prefer the episodes rather than a compilation. But that's just that's me. I mean, I understand it's a huge time commitment to sit through 9 months of a storyline.
7 years. How long did it take us to finish?
I can see a good induction, it's like, here you can watch this version, but if you want to see the real version,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. There's nothing that can replace the episodes themselves. And if you watch one Dark Shadows episode every single day, including weekends, you can watch the whole 5 years in 3.5 years. You can sort of reproduce the feeling of tune in tomorrow, which is what soap operas and movie serials and all continuing stories are all about. If you just and newspaper comic strips too, of course. you get just a little dose every day, and that whets your appetite to tune in tomorrow and see what's going to happen next. And or you can binge watch 5 or 6 episodes in one night or more. But
Yeah, that's what
but
we did.
if you go just one or two at a time, well, just one or two every day, you really get the feeling of the way it was when if you're old enough, if you were a kid back then, you watched the show every single day, and of course still watch if you still watch Days of Our Lives or any continuing show right now.
Yeah, there's not that many left anymore. So far it's not like
No.
it used to be. And jumping now to the movies, the first movie they'd done was House of Dark Shadows, which was done when the series was still going on. What are y'all's feelings on that? And I'll have to give it to Eric and Darren first.
Well, I'm gonna say my favorite thing about the first movie was seeing all the sets, like done, like at real locations. So, it kind of gave it more of uh, a realistic 3D feel, where, you are on the sets on the TV show. And it made me have appreciation of the TV show sets because they did a really good job of matching real life, with those sets and making that gothic atmosphere. So that was one of the things that really stood out for me. Darren?
Um, I I think it's a little. The first movie is a little more action horror aspect. They try to be scary with it a little bit. I don't know that they actually succeed. But I feel like they really, other than excluding Angelique and Quentin, it's like they kind of really tried to include almost everybody from the main cast in the first movie. But I don't think necessarily that it works really well as a narrative story.
What about you, Dr. Thompson?
Oh, well, House of Dark Shadows is a more violent and gory retelling of the original 1967 Barnabas storyline when Willie finds the chained coffin and releases Barnabas and he comes to Collinwood. But then it takes a turn into real horror, whereas, Dark Shadows was scary in places, but it dealt more with atmosphere and gothic mystery and romance, whereas House of Dark Shadows is much more brutal and action-packed and far more deaths. Most of the characters end up dead at the end of the movie, which you couldn't do on the TV show. But the movie is more of Dan Curtis's original vision of what he wanted Barnabas to be. His word is marauder. He wanted Barnabas to be a ruthless marauder who would be released from the coffin and bite or kill several people. And after about 3 months, the length of the Phoenix storyline, someone in the cast, one of the doctors on the show perhaps, would have driven a stake through his heart, and that would have been it. And I guess they would have gone on to another monster, maybe the werewolf, or maybe going back to ghosts or whatever. But the whole TV show changed because of Jonathan Frid's portrayal of Barnabas. He played Barnabas in a remorseful, reluctant, sympathetic way, and the fans just ate it up. He started getting fan mail, and so the story shifted, and he became the focus of the narrative. But Dan Curtis and the writers wondered, well, Barnabas already on the TV show has done some terrible things. He has abused and bitten and attacked the men and women of Collinsport. So how can we make him more sympathetic? How can we turn him into the continuing hero of the show? And so that's when they came up with the idea of, well, let's go back in time and show him when he was still human before he became a vampire. But in House of Dark Shadows, Jonathan Frid still manages to make some moments of sympathy for the vampire, but he is far less of a sympathetic or charismatic character than he was on the TV show. And the way the movie ends is the way Dan Curtis and the writers planned to end the Barnabas storyline and then go on to something else. So people have on the podcast Terror at Collinwood, hosted by Penny Dreadful, people have said that the Dark Shadows TV show and the movie are like Universal and Hammer in terms of their atmosphere and how explicit and gory and bloody they are. And that's a good analogy, I think. But House of Dark Shadows made money for MGM. It practically rescued the company that year, and got some good reviews in genre magazines like Cinefantastique, which called it the best vampire movie of the early 1970s. And this was when it was up against Taste the Blood of Dracula and The Vampire Lovers and quite a few good vampire movies, but Cinefantastique said this was the best one. And Don Glut, in one of his books, I think the Dracula book, said that too, that House of Dark Shadows was one of the best vampire movies of that time period, maybe ever. So both the TV show and the movie serve their purposes. You know, if you want a compact telling of the Barnabas story, kind of like these new DVD compilations, watch House of Dark Shadows. But if you want to really get into the character of Barnabas and see how Jonathan Frid turned him from just a two-dimensional villain into a fascinating, multifaceted character, then start watching all of the episodes.
So would you introduce somebody to Dark Shadows through the House of Dark Shadows?
Yes. I showed House of Dark Shadows to my son, Jonathan, and he liked it. And another friend, a friend of mine, Ken, ended up watching all 1,225 episodes, but I think he might have started with House of Dark Shadows also. So it's just a good way to jump right into the story and quickly learn the people and the situations.
So your son's name is Jonathan?
Yes.
Named after the actor?
No, Jonathan is my adopted son, so he was named before I knew him. So it's just a coincidence.
All right. Maybe it's destiny or something.
Hey, I do have a question. So, when you watch Dark Shadows, or House of Dark Shadows, one of the things I felt that Barnabas was not the Barnabas that people loved in the TV show. So I was wondering, did the fans? I know it made money. I know people went to see it, but did the fans of the TV show, did they like that portrayal of Barnabas in the movie, or was it, or or they mixed on it?
Well, a mixed reaction. I would say probably the majority, or maybe a slim majority of the fans liked the movie, but unfortunately, the kids' parents did not. You know, many of the people who went to see the movie were kids my age, 10, 11, 12, 13, who were watching the show every day. And their parents took them to the movie, and the parents were horrified. They thought, this is what my child has been watching every day? But of course, it's not.
Right.
House of Dark Shadows was more violent, more suggestive, more bloody by far than the continuing soap opera on TV. But the movie itself may have hastened the cancellation of the show because there was some negative reaction to the film. And Jonathan Frid himself did not like the movie. When he was making the film, he was so focused on performing his own scenes and may not have been aware of the entire scope of the film. But when he went to see the movie in the theater, he was aghast. He was horrified and disappointed because it was so brutal and his character was much more villainous and unforgivable, and so he bowed out of any second movie. Dan Curtis wanted to make the second movie about the return of Barnabas, but by that time, Jonathan Frid had grown tired of playing the Barnabas character and did not want to become typecast as a monster because, believe it or not, he did not like horror. Even though he starred in Dark Shadows and House of Dark Shadows and Seizure and The Devil's Daughter, he was not a fan of horror. He liked mystery. He liked, well-written dialogue and intricate plots and stories about people. But
Like
he
Arsene
really
Lupin.
was not interested in just out-and-out monster movies at all.
That seems a little surprising that, he didn't realize how, I guess, like violent that movie would be, since he's like, kind of like enacting these violence on people, that,
Mm-hmm.
I guess he just didn't dawn on him for some reason.
Yes.
Some of it's indirect
Yeah.
because, some of it he just, like Roger and Professor Stokes, he's not even, it's just implied.
Right. Yeah. We see them after they have been vampirized, and so Jonathan Frid never acted out scenes in which he attacked them. He attacks Carolyn in the movie and a character that Lisa Richard plays named Daphne. And of course, strangles Dr. Julia Hoffman, something that never would have happened on the TV show, although he threatened to kill her several times in the early stage of his characterization. But of course, as the show went on, they became the greatest of friends, and Julia, of course, fell in love with him, as she does in the movie too. Yeah, the unrequited love of Julia for Barnabas is one of the great things about the TV show, and many fans, including me, always wished that Barnabas would fall in love with Julia. He pursued so many unsuitable women, Vicky, Maggie, Roxanne, Kitty, Rachel, and all the time Julia was right there, and she loved him and cared for him, but he did not care for her in that way.
So it seems to be the case. No, it's like this. So were you traumatized by the movie when you saw it?
No, when I saw it, I guess I was 11 years old, and my mother took me to see it, but she didn't seem to be phased either because she watched the show with me. And when it moved to a different time here in Nashville, before I could run home from school to watch Dark Shadows, as is the true cliche, she watched it every day and told me what happened. This was just before audio cassette tapes, later in the early 70s. I would record the sound of the other soap operas when she was not at home and I was, and she listened to them, but that didn't occur to us, and we didn't have a cassette tape recorder back then, so she told me about the episodes.
And the sequel, I've heard it was going to be called Curse of Dark Shadows. Do you know if that was true?
Yes, yeah. The first title was the uninspired Dark Shadows 2, but then it became Curse of Dark Shadows, but then changed to Night of Dark Shadows. And I remarked in one of my books about Dan Curtis that you could almost switch the titles of the movies, because the Barnabas movie is all about what happens at night, vampirism, whereas Night of Dark Shadows shows off Lyndhurst, the historic home on the banks of the Hudson River in Tarrytown, New York, even better than the first movie does. We really see many more of the rooms, and we linger on the furnishings and the paintings and the tower room and the grounds and other buildings. So you could almost flip-flop the titles of the movies, and they would be more appropriate. But curse of Dark Shadows originated because when the Angelique character is about to be hanged as a witch, and she, as the full length version of the script reveals, she perhaps was not actually a witch. She utters a curse toward the men who are about to hang her, but that, like so much of the footage, got edited out. We never hear her curse anyone, and so that title became meaningless. And so I guess they just changed it to the more generic Night of Dark Shadows. But you all know about how how Night of Dark Shadows was so horribly shortened and cut to pieces on orders from the head of MGM. Um, the full movie runs about 2 hours and 9 minutes or more, and all of the footage has been found. But when Dan Curtis presented it to the head of MGM, James Aubrey, who at one time also ran CBS, he insisted on severe cuts and gave Dan Curtis essentially only about 11 or 12 hours to do it overnight. So Curtis and an MGM film editor sat all night and cut up the movie and tried to make it remain coherent and exciting and meaningful. And they did succeed mostly. But if we ever get to see the entire cut of Night of Dark Shadows, it would be a much, much better movie, and maybe even a minor classic of 1970s horror.
I would like to see the original version, see how it holds up, because it seemed like there's some incoherencies sometimes in that movie.
Oh, there was a lot of you can hear a lot of the cuts in the audio and the jumps. It was very apparent, and Darren explained to me about all of the edits that were done, and kind of under duress.
Yeah.
To get that completed.
So does it bother you that this movie has almost like nothing to do with like the original series?
Well, I'm gonna say that this. Out of the two movies, I like the second movie the best. It's a slow burn, but I feel like it's subtle in a lot of its horror. It sets up a very good story, about a descent into madness, and it really, I think it shifted away from the Dark Shadows TV show a lot. Other than the names, with Quentin in there,
Angelique.
and Angelique. I mean, it shifted. It was more to me like a Italian horror film, even with some of the music that was being played in there. So, I mean, it's a slow burn, but I do like that movie, and there's a lot of really masterful shots in it. I do. I think they tried in the first movie, there was a couple, but in the second one, I think they had a lot more masterful shots with the filmmaking.
Right, and Dan Curtis himself was growing as a director at that time. He produced and directed golf shows on the weekends for first CBS and then ABC, but he had not directed a dramatic movie or TV show until he directed about 21 various episodes of Dark Shadows stretched across 2 or 3 years. Leela Swift was a marvelous director who directed about over 800 of the 1,225 episodes. And she mentored Dan Curtis, and he learned a great deal from her, and was a quick study and a natural at it because House of Dark Shadows is so well put together. But you're right, Night of Dark Shadows, I think, is an improvement. And of course, once he gets into Burnt Offerings and his later movies, he becomes a marvelous director. His trademark is that low angle when the camera shoots up at the people. And he always said that he felt that was more dramatic and more involving for us audience members. It's as if we're in the room with them, almost sitting at their feet, looking up at them, and we're in the scene with them, watching them and studying them. So he thought that, it made it more interesting to look up than just to look straight. But yes, yeah, Night of Dark Shadows is very, very atmospheric, because of all of those great shots of Lyndhurst and the grounds and the old swimming pool and the old greenhouse and the train tracks behind the house. And of course, as you're right, Robert Cobert's music is marvelous. But you're right in that very often, we're enjoying a nice music cue and then suddenly it just cuts because the film has cut to a different scene and there's no nice fade or anything. It just stops.
It is quite abrupt at times. And so were you okay with the changes in like Quentin, not being like the Quentin we know, or Angelique not being obsessed with Barnabas, but instead of obsessed with Quentin's I guess ancestors?
I don't have a problem with it. I mean, it's actually original for a change, to see, because whenever I think of Quentin on the TV show, I think of him as kind of a cad for the most part. He's very, a womanizer and kind of braggadocious for the most part. And, this is kind of a softer Quentin. He doesn't have, in terms of who he was before the turn, before turning into Charles, but it's a much gentler side of Quentin as opposed to the Quentin from the TV show. And Angelique in the movie really doesn't really have any dialogue. She's almost like an apparition almost.
Well, she is an apparition.
Well,
except in the scenes that take place in 1810 when she was alive.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did email Dynamite Comics, since they had the rights about doing an adaptation of the original script of Night of Dark Shadows, but I never got a response back to them. I thought it'd been really cool. There've been other things like that, they adapted the original screenplay, at the Planet of the Apes. I thought then at least we could see a comic adaptation of what it would have looked like.
And that's what I was referring to earlier. They did a couple of miniseries runs of Dark Shadows with Dynamite.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have a team of Vampirella and stuff like that.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
She's teamed up with everybody now. She gets around.
I don't think she's been with the Avengers yet. But give it time.
Give it time,
Yeah. And then we'll talk about the problematic movie from 2012, Dark Shadows, which was directed by Tim Burton, starring Johnny Depp. And what's everybody's feelings on that one?
I didn't hate it.
I didn't love it.
So what do you like about it?
It's campy. It's very high camp, man. Yeah. And it really just doesn't. My favorite part is seeing the original cast. It's probably my favorite scene in the whole movie. Just that one little clip at the door. It's just very. It doesn't have the feel that. It doesn't have the feel of the show. It doesn't have the feel of the 1970s movies. It's just a whole other thing, and I don't really feel it does any of it justice.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I say is when I first saw the promo picture for the Burton movie, and I think it was
Entertainment Weekly.
Weekly, yeah. I thought the cast looked amazing. I was really interested in seeing it. All the characters that especially the guy who played Rogers,
Johnny Lee Miller.
Johnny Lee Miller. I thought they looked really good. I was like, man, this is going to be great. And then when I got there, and it was a condensed kind of change storyline, which I know they got to condense it down, but I mean, they just amalgamated some characters and just changed things around and made it super high camp. I took it for what it was, but I knew it wasn't gonna be a big milestone in the mythos of Shadows. You know.
Yeah. Some fans have said that the movie is a very good Tim Burton movie, but it's not a Dark Shadows movie.
Right.
Or it's very good if you have never seen Dark Shadows before and you just enjoy it as a serio-comic vampire movie. But for me, of course, I was disappointed when I first saw it, but it has its good points and its bad points. What it does well, it does very well, and that to me are the is every moment of drama, romance, and horror. The comedy is far too silly, but the first 8 minutes of the movie are fantastic because it's a completely serious, dramatic, shocking introduction to the characters of Barnabas and Angelique, and how in this movie, a different way, slightly, Barnabas becomes a vampire and what happens to his family. But then once Barnabas enters the world of 1972, some of it is just far too silly and just way out of control. But of course it also was a disappointment that we didn't hear any of Robert Cobert's music, except at the very beginning of the movie. There are a few bars of his music cue, The Secret Room. But, we didn't hear the Dark Shadows theme song, even though we saw about 6 or 7 shots of the waves. And we didn't hear the Collinwood theme, and we didn't hear the Josette's Music Box theme. And if you don't hear those music cues, it's not Dark Shadows. But you're right. The actors looked very good in their costumes and replicating the characters. And I was really knocked out with Collinwood and especially Collinsport. The movie should have won an Oscar for art direction because Collinwood looked great and the town of Collinsport was just out of this world. I wish we could have seen something like that on the TV show. And of course, in those early pre-Barnabas episodes, we do see some shots of Essex, Connecticut, and places like that. But so parts of the movie are really good, but then when he gets into that wild love scene with Angelique, where they're rolling around on the ceiling and hitting the walls, and then by the time the movie is over, that last 20 or 30 minutes just really goes out of control. With the statues in the house come to life, and Elizabeth totes a shotgun, and another character turns into a werewolf out of the blue, and Angelique, like in Death Becomes Her, cracks up and shatters, and the vomit and everything. They just tried to do far too much. Less is more, I think, and that's what the TV show was, definitely. Much more so than House of Dark Shadows, as you have pointed out. Less is more. Like the original Haunting, which was so much better than the 1999 remake, in which the statues came to life and things like that, like in Dark Shadows. So yeah, if you can just watch it somewhat objectively as, okay, this is a movie about vampires that Tim Burton has made, and some parts are scary and dramatic and some are really silly, well, you would enjoy it. And of course, we get to see Christopher Lee. Christopher Lee now is part of the Dark Shadows universe. But overall, I was disappointed. The first draft of the script was totally dramatic. It was written by John August, and it would have been like the TV show Kindred the Embraced, or it would have, some people have said remarked it would have been like The Godfather with vampires, or certainly Dynasty or Falcon Crest with vampires, but serious. But unfortunately, the making of the movie was delayed, and by the time before the movie came out, we had seen the Vampire Diaries and Twilight and True Blood and quite a few different vampire movie and TV shows, which were more or less completely serious. And so the filmmakers decided, well, everybody has seen serious vampires, so now let's make it funny. And so Seth Grahame-Smith came in and wrote the revised script, which added all of the humor and silly business. So, and I believe that original John August script has floated around on the internet. You might be able to find it, but I understand that that would have been much more like the original Dark Shadows and the 1991 Dark Shadows. If it could have been like that, the movie would have been great. Or if it could have been like Tim Burton's movie Sleepy Hollow, Dark Shadows would have been great.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess the timing was off, and so it degenerated into a farce in places.
Yeah, it suffered an identity problem. I mean, really, it became a lampoon. You know, I think they were like, ooh, the '70s, and we could contrast that and make it funny. You know, and they could have still played with that, but they just lost the gothic, the darkness, you know, the heart of Dark Shadows when they went into that lampoon, you know.
So did Tim Burton, like, you know, he was okay with doing campy? Was he familiar with Dark Shadows when he did this?
Oh yes, he was a fan. He ran home from school to watch Dark Shadows. So he was a fan, and I believe Johnny Depp was a fan. But I guess their idea of a fan tribute or fan homage is different from ours. But yeah, Tim Burton is a Dark Shadows fan, but I think he just turned it into a Tim Burton movie instead of Dark Shadows.
Yeah, everybody wants. That's a problem with a lot of these adaptations now these days is that all the directors want to put their mark on it instead of letting the original work shine. And
Yes.
that's the problem with most of them.
Mm-hmm.
So thumbs up, thumbs down, or thumbs sideways for that Dark Shadows movie.
The 2012, that's a thumbs down.
I'll do like that. You know,
Yeah, I would have to be sideways on it too, because some of the scenes, you know, when Barnabas at the beginning becomes a vampire and are great, but then some of the scenes are just too ridiculous and it loses it. But you're right, it was wonderful to see Jonathan Frid, Catherine Lee Scott, David Selby, and Laura Parker as the party guests. They went over to England in late June, early July of 2011 and filmed that scene. And David Selby said he addressed the silliness of the movie, and he said, well, we played fast and loose with traditional horror characters too. We were not completely reverent. We put our own spin on the characters, and that was nice of him to say. But what the TV show did with horror characters was nothing compared to the farcical nature of the 2012 movie.
Yeah, they did borrow heavily from other sources, like Dracula, Frankenstein, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, you know, The Haunting. You know.
Multiple times.
Yes.
And so I guess like Dark Shadow fans, do they regard this like Marvel fans like this, like they're the multiverse? Is there a multiverse, you know, for the Dark Shadows, you know, like with the Johnny Depp movie being like its own multiverse, you know, the House of Dark Shadow, its own multiverse, you know, is there that going on?
Yeah, I like to think that that's the case, that they can all go through a secret door and end up in any one of those timelines.
Yeah, putting some Stairway to Time.
Yeah, there you go.
Right. Dark Shadows itself dealt with a multiverse when it went into parallel time twice. And so, you know, all of the multiverse in Marvel movies and Everything Everywhere All at Once and so many, and all of the CW TV shows, that's nothing new to us fans who read comic books and read science fiction and watched Dark Shadows, Star Trek, and Doctor Who, we know all about alternate realities. And of course, the Dark Shadows paperback novels by Dan Ross are their own universe, and the comic books, the Gold Key comic books, are their own universe. And years ago, in the fanzine The World of Dark Shadows, one fan even remarked that his way of explaining House of Dark Shadows and Night of Dark Shadows is that they were hallucinations and fever dreams that Barnabas had when he was locked in the chained coffin. So that was interesting. But you're right. Each of those is its own universe. And of course, all of the fan fiction that the fans have written over the years in fanzines and on the internet. So yes, something like Dark Shadows is perfect to be interpreted multiple times in different universes.
So we could have a possible like Dark Shadows, cinematic universe going on.
Yeah, and the Big Finish audio dramas are yet another incarnation of the show. And of course, the 1991 Dark Shadows, which I thought was very well done. It is its own entity, like the recent revivals of Hawaii Five-0 and MacIver. It was happening right then. It had not happened in the past. And so the 1991 Dark Shadows happened right then. That Barnabas was released at that moment, and that Victoria Winters came to Collinwood, and it all happened for them then and for the first time.
And I wanted to bring up also, there was a documentary that was called Masters of Dark Shadows, which came out in 2019, which talks about the show, and also your favorite director of all time, Dan Curtis. So did you get to watch that one?
We've watched that, yeah.
What y'all's
while back.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I really enjoyed it. And by the way, speaking of Dan Curtis's low angle, you guys shot of you sitting there. It's as if Dan Curtis put the camera like that, and he's looking up at you.
It was an homage.
It was
Yes,
planned.
okay, good.
They did
Yeah.
that deliberately.
So yeah, I liked Master of Dark Shadows very much. I just wish it could have been 2.5 or 3 hours, because it went in depth into Dan Curtis and his career and his thought processes and Dark Shadows and the movies. But then I wish it could have gone into much more detail about his other adaptations of Frankenstein, Dracula, The Turn of the Screw, and of course Burnt Offerings, Trilogy of Terror, and his great World War II miniseries, The Winds of War and War and Remembrance. So there could be a part 2 of that documentary. But what was there, I thought, was outstanding. All of the interviews and everything that the things that people said about Dan Curtis. I thought all of it was really good and very well done. And did you all see the Jonathan Frid documentary that came out a couple of years ago? I thought that was outstanding, possibly even better than the Dan Curtis documentary, because
I think it's still available on Amazon. Sorry for
yes. Yeah, Mary O'Leary, 6-time Daytime Emmy Award winner, who worked with Jonathan Frid as his business partner back in the 1980s, lovingly put together that documentary and left no stone unturned. It's just a magnificent documentary, and was nominated for some awards, and I think won. So yeah, both of those documentaries I would highly recommend. They are very, very good. They are labors of love.
And
I think the Jonathan Frid documentary is where I first learned that he was actually fired from Dark Shadows.
Yes, and a recent episode of the podcast Terror at Collinwood with Penny Dreadful and Mary O'Leary goes into this in great detail. They were trying to nail down the exact reasons why Dark Shadows ended when it did. And one reason was House of Dark Shadows itself, and another was the Leviathan storyline in late 69 and early 70, which the fans did not care for. And economics and ratings and actors becoming restless and wanting to move on, and problems between Dan Curtis and Jonathan Frid about, well, is he going to play Barnabas anymore or ever, or is he even going to be on the show, or let's make him a different character, which did happen briefly. So yeah, there are many reasons factors that went into why Dark Shadows ended somewhat abruptly when it did, on April 2nd of 1971. And but then many of the cast members went immediately back up to Lyndhurst in upstate New York and started working on Night of Dark Shadows. And speaking of David Selby and Laura Parker, who were not in House of Dark Shadows, they were doing the heavy lifting on the TV show in the spring of 1970, when Jonathan Frid, Grayson Hall, Joan Bennett, and others were up at Lyndhurst making the movie. That was when the 1970 Parallel Time storyline was going on, and David Selby and Laura Parker were front and center on the show at that time. And so I'm glad that they were rewarded with their own movie a year later, in which they were able to shine. But sadly, as you pointed out, Laura Parker's part was drastically cut. She was going to be one of the main focuses of Night of Dark Shadows. But in an interview that Laura gave me years ago, she said, many times during the making of that movie, Dan Curtis came to me and apologized. He said, I'm sorry that it's going a different way, that I'm having to lose some of your scenes. And Laura explained, I think he just decided that the love story with David Selby and Kate Jackson was more interesting than some of the scenes that he had planned with Laura Parker. But she said she didn't mind. She said, I got paid and I got to be on a movie set, which is always fascinating to me. I talked to everybody. I was fascinated with how the stunt people rigged me up to hang from the tree. And so she did not have any regrets, but what we fans do, we wish that she could have been in the movie much more than she was.
Yeah, she was one of the champions of the series. She did keep it going, with her own books and everything. And
Yeah, I really wish we could have got to see a movie where it was Barnabas versus Angelique. That's what I would have liked to see.
Well, if Jonathan Frid had remained, the second movie might have been a condensation of the 1795 story, but it too might have taken a bloodier, gorier turn, and might not have been quite as satisfying either. But you're right, Night of Dark Shadows, although it was similar to 1970 Parallel Time and the novel and movie Rebecca, was a departure from what we had already seen. And so since it was so different, we were able to accept it. Even a car chase. We'd never seen that on Dark Shadows, but there's a car chase in Night of Dark Shadows. So it is a departure, and I think perhaps a more mature handling of the characters and the situations.
And, since it's a Lovecraft show, I have to bring up, and you already brought them up, Leviathan. They never made another appearance, ever again in either shows or the movies. But I often thought that, if done right, they could have made a really good adversary for Barnabas.
Oh, yes. Well, and here's my fanboy opinion. In House of Dark Shadows, there seems to be no Angelique, but Barnabas in one line tells Willie, when they put this curse on me. And my fanboy theory is, I guess the House of Dark Shadows Barnabas was cursed by the Leviathans because that pronoun perhaps renames the Leviathans. But yeah, that story started in one way, but the fans didn't like it, and so the writers had to regroup and go in another direction. The fans didn't like seeing Barnabas turn bad again. He really turned evil again when he was under the spell and control of the Leviathans, And then the fans didn't like to see Barnabas take orders from children. You know, the Leviathan being started out as a baby, then a first grader, and then a teenage boy, and then finally Christopher Pinnock as Jeb Hawks. But the fans didn't like that. And so I believe it was on Christmas Eve of 1969, Jonathan Fridd and Grayson Hall came in and shot a kind of like a standalone episode in which Barnabas confesses everything to Julia, and he says, you know, I've been under their power, but I want to resist them and I want to fight them now. And so that turned the story. And so Barnabas, Maggie, Willie, Julia, Quentin began opposing Jeb and the people like Elizabeth, David, Amy that he had put under his power. Yeah, the story, you know, used great Lovecraftian themes like the Dunwich Horror does, which came out around the same time, and could have been great, but it was just like the Dark Shadows 2012 movie. It just strayed too far from what Dark Shadows was and had been up to that time. It was more like I Married a Monster from Outer Space or Invasion of the Body Snatchers and a little bit of Rosemary's Baby. But the fans didn't really want to see any of that. They wanted to continue seeing Barnabas as the heroic but flawed, but usually admirable character that he had become.
It's the one story that strays from the gothic element in Dark Shadows. I actually like the Leviathan story. I just think they, as with most of their storylines, they kind of lose themselves at the end of it. And they kind of try to tie everything up very quickly and they start throwing in like Nicholas Blair and whatever they can at it to make it work, and none of it really does. And they just kind of move away from it as quickly as possible. And that's really my problem with the Leviathan story. I think the end's just crap.
Yeah, I liked the other parts of the story that were going on during that time. I liked the Quentin and Amanda reunion, and they're going down into the netherworld, and I liked the Chris Jennings werewolf story with the moon poppy that tried to cure him but failed, and I liked seeing Nicholas Blair again, and loved seeing Angelique married to Sky Rumson and living in that luxurious mansion and wearing very stylish for 1970 clothes and hairdos. So I liked all of the non-Leviathan things that were happening in the story at that point, but I was one of the fans who really did not care to see how Barnabas changed.
Yeah. What about Jeb Hawk? How do you feel about his character, especially when he turned almost like good at the end and like was helping Barnabas?
Well, I did not like the young iterations of the Leviathan being, you know, Alexander and Michael. I thought the whole storyline got much better when Christopher Pinnock joined the show as Jeb, and Michael Stroka came back as Bruno. So yeah, I liked Jeb. I don't think that was not my favorite of Christopher Pinnock's characters. I liked Gabriel Collins better, and some of his others. But yes, I think by that time they had sort of rehabilitated and reinvigorated the Barnabas character. And now they were trying to do the same thing with Jeb. They were trying to make him go the route of the reluctant monster, and tried to make him more sympathetic, you know, when he resisted the Leviathans and stayed in his human form in order to be with Carolyn and all of that. So, but yes, you're right. Some of the storylines on Dark Shadows 1897 and Leviathan and Adam and Eve went on too long and didn't seem to have a clear roadmap to how it was going to end. Some of the other storylines did. The Phoenix story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. So does 1795. So does 1970 Parallel Time. So does 1840. But with some of those other stories, the writers were changing horses in midstream and switching ideas and wanting to do something different. And so those stories are more ponderous than some of the others. The Adam Eve Nicholas story stalled because it took far too long to create Eve. There were too many episodes when Barnabas and Julia told Adam, you have to be patient, we're trying. And then when Eve, the fabulous Marie Wallace, finally came onto the show, she didn't stay on long enough. She should have come on sooner and stayed longer before she was killed, and the story drastically overnight switched to the Haunting of Collinwood story, and Adam and Eve were no more.
And how many times do we have to watch Adam kidnap Vicky?
Yes, right. Yeah. So that story went on for too long. But there again, there were many great things about the story, such as the dream curse and some of the other things that were happening, the ghost of Trask and some of the other things that were happening. And Robert Rodan gave a great portrayal of Adam and really showed a character arc and growth from literally an infant to an adult and then to a corrupted adult, an embittered monster, literally, because Nicholas ruined him. But a lot of fans don't care for that story because it just went on too long. But Robert Rodan said that most of his fan letters were from little kids, not necessarily from the teenagers, college students, and adults who were watching, but little kids wrote to Adam because they identified with him, because he was childlike, at least at the beginning.
I like the Adam character, and I would have liked to have seen him come back, but he just disappeared.
Yes, I wish Robert Rodan had come back. I wish John Lascelles as Dr. Guthrie had come back. I wish Frank Schofield as Bill Malloy had come back. So yeah, there were several people who I wish could have been on the show longer.
So have you ever heard, like, if there was an original Leviathan storyline, like, what would have been the original ending of it been?
No, I haven't heard. Surely at some point the Leviathans would have had to have been defeated, but that also would have meant that the Barnabas character would have been defeated even more. I guess they would have spun it like, oh, the spell is broken. I have my will back now and I'm okay. But that probably would have been unsatisfying to the fans.
I don't know that the writers of Dark Shadows knew what they were going to do the following week, let alone like 3 months down the road.
Right, except for those stories that I mentioned. I think it was sort of a lot of it was improvised and thought up at the spur of the moment. And you've heard the famous story about how, all of the kids gathered at the stage door and so one time the writers themselves couldn't remember what they had written 6 months or a year earlier and went down and asked the children, what happened to this story and who did that to what? And the kids filled them in. So the writers themselves were confused. And I think that story is probably true because who better to ask than us fans? We know everything about the show. So the writers were smart to do that. But on some of those long, meandering stories, I think the writers were trying to, think up extra things as they went along. And Dan Curtis himself was a big part of the writing process. Many of the ideas were his, and some of the actors have said when Dan Curtis got bored with a certain story or a situation or a character, then it ended and switched. And you can, unlike all of the other soap operas, like As the World Turns and Days of Our Lives, it's so seamless and continuing. But with Dark Shadows, you can actually point to dates on a calendar when, okay, this story has ended and now it's this. It's not Adam and Eve anymore. Now it's The Haunting of Collinwood, or it's not the Leviathans anymore. It's 1970 parallel time. So in that respect, it was more like a newspaper comic strip or Marvel Comics or something, where you had a sense of, okay, this is the saga now, but okay, now it's over, and so now we've started this one.
You made me think of there was a little mini documentary I saw where there was one of the kids who used to like go to the stage, and he brought his camera, and so he filmed a lot of the behind the scenes that was going on, and he found it like years later and assembled it together. It's like a little mini documentary. That was fun to watch. And apparently some of the kids would like try to like sneak into Grayson's Hall's like, dressing room and stuff like that. She had to like, kick them out and wag her finger at them. But
Flick.
so I guess if it was like a movie you would love to see made of Dark Shadows now, what would it be for y'all? What would be your next dream movie for Dark Shadows? No pressure.
Well,
I guess the period piece for me,
mm-hmm.
yeah, I would say, back in the olden days, and I guess the origin story. So I don't think we really got that. I mean, we got snippets of that, but I would like to stay there, during the whole, and see Barnabas. It ends with Barnabas being, in prison.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would be a good movie.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, there are other time periods that could have been explored, much more in the 1940s when Elizabeth's husband, Paul Stoddard, was there. The 1920s when Elizabeth was young would have been interesting, or um, other time periods that were not hit upon, and of course Dan Ross set his novels in many different time periods, but many of his books cannot be reconciled to his other books. He would pick a year in the 1800s, and there would be a Collins family in Collinwood, but in another book that might have taken place just 10 or 15 years later, it was a totally different family. So even his own books were parallel times of each other. But it was all Dark Shadows, and so it entertains us, whether it's the books or the comic books or movies or Big Finish audio dramas or whatever.
Well, thank y'all for coming on. Before we go, I just want to, Eric and Darren, just tell me some of the things you've been doing. Promote yourself and some of your projects.
Well, I mean, for me, I've been working on fantasyunderground.com. I got a web novel out called My Pet Hellhound. It's actually releases a new chapter every Wednesday and Friday until January 2025. So we got 30 chapters that are going to be delivered. We're on chapter 8 right now. And there are a few little Dark Shadow Easter eggs in there. I would say some, like names or not events or anything to do with, it is a Gothic setting, in the school setting, and a lot of the there's some big houses and mansions and things like that. So there are some setting pieces. So a little bit of my love for Dark Shadows is in there.
I don't have anything to promote.
Well, I know you're a fan of Elvis and Beach Boys, so I think I've heard correctly.
Yeah, I'm an Elvis fan. I mean, I do occasionally guest on a podcast called TCB Cast, but that somebody I know that does, they do a weekly podcast. I've been a guest on there a few times, but that's about it.
All right, Dr. Thompson, you got any new books out?
No, my 3 books about Dan Curtis are out in new, revised, updated second editions. I keep learning more and more about Dan Curtis and his productions and Dark Shadows, and so I updated and revised all 3 of the books. And I've been speaking on several podcasts lately, yours and Terror at Collinwood, Ghostly Gallery, The Late Late Horror Show, and others. And my friend Larry Underwood, who is Nashville's TV horror host, Dr. Gangrene, is writing a book about Nashville's TV horror hosts, Dr. Lucifer, Sir Cecil Creep, The Count of Five, Dr. Gangrene himself. And so I'm writing the foreword to that book, and I also am proofreading and correcting the book. I do a lot of proofreading work for people. So lately I've been proofreading and correcting, and every now and then a little script doctoring on other people's writings as well as my own. And then I have gone back to teaching. In 2020, I retired from Tennessee State University after 35 years. But in the last year, I have gone back part-time to TSU and to Nashville State Community College. And I've been teaching a class or two each semester at those schools. So I'm staying very busy with all of my different activities and family, my son and my great nieces, and a lot of activities.
Yeah, looks like everybody's been busy. The stars are no longer right. We must cease all discussions until they align again next month. 30 Plus Minutes of H.P. Lovecraft is sponsored by Release the Curtis Cut. This podcast was created in association with the LovecraftPod.com and the Logan Spected Fiction Group with the help of the Logan County Public Library and the Great Old Ones. Special thanks for Katie Tysons for cutting us in the right places. And a thanks for Josh for the peaches. Until we meet again, may you avoid Princess Cthulhu's greatest episode collection.